Ladies, gentlemen, and Herodrum of all ages, the PTR that was ongoing for the major Eternal Realm mechanical changes of Season 4 properly concluded last night for Diablo 4, and after a full week of engaging with this testing, trying out the various mechanical shifts, and just seeing how it all felt, now that it's over, it feels like it's the perfect time to give my proper sort of breakdown and review of all the new things. And to put it simply, whether or not, I think this is going to quote-unquote save the game, as everyone always asks me that. First things first, we need to talk about the Codex of Power, as I think with everything else going on, this change has been a bit underappreciated, honestly. Powers get upgraded as you salvage legendary items, so the only things that are worth keeping in your stash are uniques and items that have good affixes on them, which in turn cuts the gear that you want to save exponentially and makes the stash system much better. It makes it so even with a full week of farming stuff, I only had to actually sort my stash out one time, maybe at most, and also the actual stash filtering makes a lot more sense when you're just looking at affixes on the gear. So the stash has mostly been fixed by that concept alone. But more importantly, it makes legendary powers feel more important and more like something that you are really searching for. Getting the base version of each power is now way easier, and importantly, this means that getting early game builds online should also be much easier. But it creates a longer term chase for those top roll legendary drops. And importantly, it makes it so when you get a maximum roll, you have that roll for the rest of the season, regardless of gear swaps, and also on ults, which is a really big deal. Now, ults mid-season will be significantly stronger than they've ever been, so making a second character in a season is much more viable of a choice and properly incentivized a bit more than it has ever been, and thus they're trying to get people to actually increase their playtime by playing more classes. As well though, on top of making the earlier game easier, this system also creates a longer term chase for those top roll legendary drops, and importantly it makes it so when you get a maximum roll of an aspect, you have that roll for the rest of the season regardless of gear swaps, and that's what makes the moment when you see a high roll of a good legendary drop really exciting. The fact that you will always have it, and that's exactly the type of thing that the game wants you to have. Excitement when loot drops on the floor and you pick it up. On which note, we have the greater changes to itemization as a whole too, one of those changes being greater affixes. Any item in the game that drops from an enemy can roll with these on them. It gives you the maximum roll of an affix, but also boosted by a further 50%. And through the other new systems, this can be boosted even higher up. But this sort of changes the way that you look at gear as it drops, because not only can any affix that is on a piece of gear roll as greater, but you can also have gear drop with every single affix slot as a greater affix too, which is massive if it were to happen. In the short term, this makes every drop a bit more exciting. When you see those greater affixes, they have the potential to be real game changers, my favorite example really still being greater affix cooldown reduction with Masterwork upgrade stacked on top of it is nearly 20% cooldown reduction from a single piece of gear, which is of course absolutely nuts. As well, this changes the way that we think about uniques as items, as unique items are of course important to have for their base effects and the builds that they matter for, so having the base version is just a good thing to have in general, but now you actually have a further chase with this system and further goals with farming these past just exclusively having the effects to begin with, because we also can have any and all affixes on any unique in the game drop as greater affixes, and that's a big deal, applying all the way up to even uber uniques. This part of the system will be less relevant to you the less invested you get when playing the game, of course, but that specific part of it for the people who really go hard on grinding out the best of the best gear possible gives them a much further potential chase to get through RNG. And while the power that it would give you isn't necessary to beat anything in the game, it is a clearly notable power difference that makes everything easier and quicker. Then we also have the tempering system. This lets you personally choose to add specific affixes to gear. There is some RNG related to the system, and it is in fact currently possible to brick an otherwise perfect legendary by not getting lucky with your tempering rolls. But I would argue, since this doesn't apply to uniques as they can't be tempered, perfect legendaries are much easier to find these days. The only time where this would be a real shame is if it happens on a multiple greater affix item, at which point you need to weigh what matters most to you. And again, I sort of like that as well personally, though I can definitely see people who would be upset by the idea of bricking an otherwise great item through bad luck on the crafting part of things. So my personal answer, if I were to say to add a different change to this, would be to add in a special boss or something on the level of like Duriel or Andariel, high tier ladder bosses, but this boss functions purely in another way, where each time that you defeat it, you can fully reset temper durability on one item, so you can have another go. I don't even know if I consider this a system that needs to be changed or fixed, because I do adore the amount of customization it offers, and I think that the ability to brick an item is a gameplay decision, not necessarily a mistake, but I do think that would be the solution to it if you do just want to make everyone happy. Then we also have the Masterworking mechanic and the pit activity that is tied to it, which I will get to in a moment, but the pit is minimum level 100 enemies, so Masterworking as an itemization thing is the latest game unlocked crafting mechanic in this system. The system functionally replaces the old blacksmith blacksmith upgrading, increasing the numbers on all affixes on a piece of gear up to 12 total ranks. The majority of these ranks increase all affix values by 5%, but every 4th rank along the way boosts 1 random affix by 25%, which is of course a very large amount. Through this system, just getting full upgrades makes a piece of gear insanely stronger than it would be without them, but obviously there is again that further much longer term chase on these of Masterworking. For example, Masterworking for getting all of the right affixes upgraded in the right ways. For example, one affix could be triple upgraded. I've got Dust Devil size here on a sword on my Barbarian, for example, so why on earth would I not want to try and turn that number orange for a ridiculous increase to it? And you can do that with literally any affix on any piece of gear if you get good enough RNG on the upgrades. The best part, there's a reset button in this system too. Masterworking costs materials every time that you do it, of course, which you will not get back ever, but if you get a roll that you don't like RNG wise along the journey of upgrading a piece of equipment, you can easily just move your mouse over, press this reset button right here, and start again. You don't get permalocked, there's no bricking with this system at all, which makes it the perfect final step really. Something where realistically, because of the reset system, with enough effort and time put in, eventually, any piece of gear will technically be guaranteed to get that perfect Masterworking combo. But the amount of time just depends on your luck, and if you have the perfect piece of gear other than this, then you can roll that forever, really. As for the balancing in terms of how the system felt while I was mass crafting with it, you can get a hell of a lot of the materials for this that you need from the pit as soon as you are in a reasonably endgame build. But it also takes veiled crystals. Everything in endgame takes veiled crystals. There's so many of them you need everywhere, and they just don't currently drop plentifully enough on the PTR to fill their role of importance across multiple different systems and mechanics. The player base has been pretty vocal about this though, everyone has been talking about that, so hopefully the developers will be looking into shifting these numbers a bit, either the cost or the drop rate, or ideally a mix of both. Because in my opinion, limiting things like Masterworking by the pit currency makes sense, but limiting it by general veiled crystals just feels really bad. If the thing stopping you from gambling away trying to make a perfect item is something that you can't really directly or meaningfully target farm, that doesn't feel good. That said, if it does get fixed, this system will be genuinely great. On the whole, I think the combination of greater affixes, tempering, and Masterworking is a really strong move to make various parts of the game more engaging, change the pace of the endgame to both be more exciting in individual moments as loot is dropping, but also creating much longer term chase goals than ever before in the game, lengthening the potential lifetime of a season depending on your goals as a player. Then let's talk about the pit activity itself then. This mechanic is fun, unlocking increasing difficulty tiers as you succeed at it, timer on the side of the screen to just kill monsters and fill up a bar, randomly generated themed maps densely packed with enemies and shrines that you kill until you fill the bar. Then you teleport to a boss fight room, and if you succeed at this whole thing within the timer, you unlock further tiers of the pit to then tackle, and also get materials for Masterworking. Also worth mentioning, there are 3 types of Masterworking material that drop from this, all different rarities for different stages of Masterworking, and while the low grade materials stop dropping in higher tier pit runs, you can actually exchange the materials for lower grade versions at an alchemist at a 5:1 ratio, which means that you are absolutely loaded with early tier Masterworking materials once you reach even tier 40 or 50 of the pit, so it really does fuel itself quite well if you're able to push it. I think the mechanic is genuinely quite fun to engage with. It's just very back to back, there's no real downtime when you're going through it, it's very non-stop, just flowing through just fields of enemies without actually having any issues. It's the enjoyable parts of Abattoir of Zir without the frustratingly quick scaling from feeling like it was easy to dying in an instant. There's rewards for doing the highest tier that you can do as well, without pushing you to go too far, but extremely applicable reasons to push further tiers as you get stronger, as further tiers give more Masterworking materials, which gives you more rolls at the RNG machine to just get perfect crafting done on your gear, rewarding the powerful people with a way to gain more power in a faster way that also lasts a long time, something that I always think is a really good combination of things to put together. Past that then we have the Helltide changes, and I think Helltide is honestly fun now. That's the best thing that I can ever really say about it. It is now densely packed enough with enemies, also with little minor activities that are engaging to interact with, including zones that you're supposed to stand in a little circle that spawn endless waves of enemies around you while sapping increasing amounts of health from you until you either leave or die. Then the satisfying feeling when your build reaches a stage where you can actually survive in these zones and their increasing damage that they deal to you until they actually physically time out because they give up if they don't kill you after like 2 minutes straight. It just really plays into the power fantasy of the game, and I love that there's a quantifiable stage of power gain there, and you are rewarded for these activities with massive amounts of Infernal Cinders as well in extremely low farm times, which makes getting the actual rewards of Helltide much easier too. There's also the new active event, the Blood Maidens, which are spawned at an altar with 3 baneful hearts, which are just rare drops from enemies during Helltide. This creates a much tougher version of the Season 2 vampire mechanic that was was relatively similar. This boss genuinely kicked the ass of most people I saw fight it in the first day or two of the PTR before their builds started coming together. And I don't mean that in like, how dare they make it that hard? No, it was fun. It was good. It was the right type of challenging. And again, it was great to watch my build get progressively stronger to a point where I could then survive the fight normally and just get it done. It would just take a little bit of time to then at the point at the end of the PTR where I could kill the maiden before she even did her first actual mechanic. And then there is of course the ever-present threat meter mechanic in the corner of Helltide. This fills up as you kill enemies in Helltide. When it's full, it will spawn enemies on your head at short intervals until the bar empties. Then it will spawn an extra powerful elite called a Hellborn. These are just Helltide infested player character archetypes. Again, we're using the Bloodseeker concept from Season 2, but in a permanent sort of way. Across the board, Helltide just feels way better to me, everywhere. I actually consider it to be an enjoyable activity to farm in endgame now, rather than just a thing that I had to do for the materials that it dropped. And cool thing to note here as well, is that there is now no material that only drops from Helltide, so you have the choice to never even touch it if you don't want to, even if you still don't like it after the changes. That brings us to our next section then, which is the boss ladder. A big part of this is base changes to the system for how the summoning materials will now drop. They used to only drop from one set activity each for each boss, but now there is a lot more sort of intermingling with this, meaning there are things like Exquisite Blood for Lord Zir dropping from Hellborn or the Blood Maiden in Helltide now, Grotesque Debtors spawning after Blood Maiden kills in Helltide as well, to then drop Barshan materials, and Helltide itself of course being the main source of living steel. All of these things can come from the one activity very easily. All elites in the game all now also have a chance to drop any of the boss summon materials, except the ones for Duriel and Adariel of course, and treasure goblins are now guaranteed to drop the same as well, which makes them extremely valuable even in proper endgame now compared to how they were treated before. Then we have our next major change, new boss added to the ladder, which is Andariel on the same tier as Duriel. This gives boosted uber unique drop rates and shares the same general drop pool as Duriel for the most part. The fight isn't overly complex but does have its own unique mechanics, and importantly it provides a farm alternative for uber uniques that isn't Duriel. You can now farm any summoning material from any activity as well, it's important to note, though they are still most efficiently farmed in specific ways. With Duriel most effectively farmed from focusing on Helltide, getting you Gregoire and Varshan, doing the Whispers of the Dead activities within, and Dariel best farmed from Nightmare Dungeons, getting you Beast and Ice, then also just Lord and Zir bits from Treasure Goblins, World Bosses, things like that along the way. That means depending on which activities you prefer, you will still get materials to climb the boss ladder no matter what, and get rolls at Uber Uniques, whichever boss you actually get to fight. So you get to play how you want and get rewarded for it through the system, which again is just a positive for the endgame flow. The final major change here then is the addition of the Tormented boss versions. They use a material that comes from the Pit activity, along with 5 times the normal amount of their boss ladder summon materials to summon a level 200 version of a ladder boss, called a Tormented boss. These are absolutely brutal, the hardest thing that I have done in this game by a mile. They have insane amounts of health, they do crazy damage, and also every time they hit you with one of their larger attacks, they increase your damage taken for the rest of the fight. So you really do have to play well to kill these, unless you significantly outgear them, which you would only ever really do in the tippity-top endgame setups, or with maybe potentially broken busted builds. This in itself adds a new layer of challenge that is quite fun to the endgame, and the theory behind this is really solid, right? Create super strong versions of boss, manually, your choice, kill the boss, get more rewards than the base version of the boss would give you because you have proven yourself to be strong, and this rewards you for being this powerful. However, the really big issue that I have with this is if you do Tormented Gregoire, Varshan, Beast and Ice, or Lord Zir, they still only give you one of their advanced boss summon material, for example, Shards of Agony from Gregoire. This activity, the Tormented versions, costs 5 times the normal amount of boss summon materials to summon a Tormented boss, but even though they have increased drop rates for everything else, they still only drop one of these summon mats for the further bosses, which means if you're doing any of these bosses specifically for climbing up to the uber unique ones, there's absolutely zero incentive to do the Tormented version. In fact, you are punished if you choose to do that, because you just lose a significant amount of materials by doing so. That said, the actual increase in drops and drop rate seems absolutely exceptional from the few kills I've done of Tormented bosses. Their cosmetic rare drops were dropping constantly from these, like candy, really every single time, and by that logic, uber uniques and also higher greater affix roll items seem to be much more common from these as well, which does make them more than anything worth doing Tormented as Duriel and Andariel if you're able to do these, and then also worth doing the others only if you are hunting a greater affix version of a unique that is from their drop table specifically. That said, I think this is still just sort of odd in its current state. I think that it would be far better if they just made the Tormented boss ladder bosses drop at least 5 times the normal amount of boss summon materials, so that it is actually worth the extra cost of being 5 times the summon materials to summon in the first place. Though if it were me, I would make it drop 6 or 7 even, just to really incentivize doing one super hard fight over 5 piss easy ones. You know, you just want to keep players engaged more, and you do that by making them fight more challenging fights. And that's pretty much it then. The good, the bad, and as you have probably gleaned, my feelings are majoritarily positive across the board. I think on the whole, every major system change is great. I think there are some fixes that need to be done here and there, of course. I had some gripes that I've brought up, and some things the devs have already even mentioned looking into, and others are just numerical things that are behind the scenes that the devs can whip up no problem before season release over a month from now. All this to say, I'm feeling pretty positive about season 4 myself. I'm not saying, hey, everyone will love this. I'm saying I think it looks good. I think if you are someone who has ever cared about Diablo 4, it's at least worth looking into these changes and deciding for yourself whether it will be worth your time or not to try it again when the new season comes. Why should I tell you if this is going to save Diablo 4 when I can just show you what the changes are and let you decide for yourself? Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.